approximately 9:27 in the morning, Tehran time, on Saturday, February 28, 2026. The digital shutter of a satellite passing hundreds of miles above the Earth captured a sight that would change the course of human history forever. The images, processed in near real time by analysts at Maxar Technologies and Planet Labs, revealed a landscape of total, uncompromising devastation. The heart of the Iranian capital, once a sprawling symbol of theocratic power, was now a tapestry of smoldering craters and twisted steel. The most striking visual evidence centered on the compound of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. What had been a fortress of absolute authority was reduced to a pile of gray-blue ash and broken concrete. The high-resolution imagery showed 30 separate impact points on that single complex alone, a level of precision that signaled a terrifying new era of warfare. This was not just a military operation. It was a political decapitation executed with surgical ruthlessness. The world watched in a state of collective shock as news agencies began to confirm what the satellites had already seen. President Donald Trump took to social media to announce that the supreme leader, a man who had ruled for 36 years, was dead. The confirmation ripple effect moved through the halls of power in Washington and Tel Aviv. This joint mission, known by various code names including Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion, had achieved its primary objective in a single morning. The satellite photos showed that the indestructible bunkers and the layers of reinforced protection that the Iranian regime had spent 47 years building had failed. The smoke billowing over Tehran, visible from space, was the funeral pyre of the old order. Analysts noted that the strikes occurred in broad daylight, during the morning of the Jewish Sabbath, and in the middle of the holy month of Ramadan. It was a timing calculated to maximize the element of surprise and to catch the senior leadership during a rare moment of collective gathering. Beyond the capital, the scope of the devastation revealed by these celestial eyes was even more staggering. 500 targets across western and central Iran had been struck simultaneously. The satellite passes over Isfahan, Karaj, and the port city of Bushehr revealed that the infrastructure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had been systematically dismantled. At the tactical fighter bases, where the regime had kept its aging fleet of Phantoms and Tomcats airborne through decades of sanctions, the runways were now cratered and the hangars were collapsed. The images showed the remains of aircraft that had been destroyed before they could even taxi to the runway. This was the Genesis Formation in action, the largest military flyover in the history of the Israeli Air Force, consisting of 200 fighter jets working in total coordination with the United States Navy. The strategic silence from the Iranian government in the first hours following the attack was as telling as the explosions themselves. Internet traffic across the country dropped by 50% as cyber attacks paralyzed state-run news agencies like IRNA. The satellite imagery confirmed that command and control centers had been hit with such speed that an orderly transfer of power was impossible. The head of the judiciary, the defense minister, and the chief of staff of the armed forces were all reportedly caught in the same web of fire. As the sun began to set on that first day, the world realized that the regional octopus, which had extended its tentacles through proxies for decades, had finally lost its head. The images showed ordinary Iranians beginning to gather in the streets, not just in mourning, but in a confused, raw state of relief. The era of the Ayatollah had ended not in a slow decline, but in a sudden, blinding flash of 21st century power. The abyss between the two military powers was not just a matter of numbers. It was a fundamental shift in the physics of combat. While Iran scrambled its aging fleet of F-4 Phantom II's museum pieces with a pulse that mechanics had kept flying through sheer ingenuity for nearly 50 years, they were hunting a ghost they could not see. The F-35C Lightning High, operating under the call sign Reaper 1, engaged South Iranian fighters simultaneously without ever appearing on their analog radar screens. In a matter of minutes, the F-bomb Muilam achieved a Mot % kill rate, systematically eliminating Mot Funnam of Iran's operational Phantom fleet before the pilots even knew they were in a dogfight. This was the reality of the air campaign, an invisible assassin dismantling a regional air force that was blind and exposed. Satellite imagery confirmed that the destruction on the ground at Tactical Fighter Base Sao in Bushehr was total, with fuel storage tanks and maintenance hangars housing decades of scavenged parts erased in a single minute window. Underneath the surface of this aerial dominance lay the most complex military operation in American history, Operation Midnight Hammer. The focus was the Fordo nuclear facility, a cathedral of concrete buried up to Mot Trem meters into solid rock, designed specifically to be indestructible. For Muilam years, a single analyst at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency had studied every ventilation shaft and fracture line of that mountain. He understood that while the GBU Namui by Bunker Buster could penetrate Sao Mui Mot meters of rock, it did need to punch through the mountain. It needed to be threaded through the mountain's own architecture. B high-spirit stealth bombers completed a grueling bomb-mui by-hour continuous flight from Missouri to drop their payloads with terrifying precision. Num bombs entered a single ventilation shaft in sequence, detonating inside the centrifuge halls and creating a shockwave that multiplied against the rock walls, shattering the machines that were too delicate to survive the displacement. The satellite imagery following Nung's strikes presented different versions of the truth that officials in Washington would fight over for months. Maxar satellite photos showed massive impact craters along the ridge of the Fordo complex and tunnel entrances sealed by collapsed earth. While some analysts argued the damage was superficial because the craters looked shallow, experts pointed out that deep penetration weapons inflict their destruction hundreds of feet below the surface, invisible to any satellite lens. However, there was a more haunting detail captured in the imagery just days before the bombs fell. Murisao cargo trucks were photographed loading materials at Fordo. This suggested that at least bone-trum kilograms of enriched uranium might have been moved to an unknown location before the facility was neutralized. The program was not gone. It had merely been driven deeper into the shadows, into a network of bombmui plus nuclear sites that no Western satellite could currently identify. As the military reality settled, the economic consequences began to spiral out of control. Iran responded to its decapitated leadership by threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, the critical shipping lane through which high % of the world's oil supply flows. The Iranian rial plummeted to million sautram bamui thousand to the dollar as capital fled the country. Regional markets in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Qatar, cities that pride themselves on stability, watched as falling missile debris struck luxury hotels and international airports. The war risk premium for oil prices was overtaken by the reality of a shooting war across Bay countries simultaneously. What began as a surgical strike to remove a nuclear threat had expanded into a regional configuration where the price of security was being paid by ordinary citizens and global markets alike. The dawn of this new era of conflict was not met with silence from the remnants of the Iranian regime. Instead, the skies over the entire Middle East changed color as Tehran launched a massive, multi-front retaliatory barrage known as Operation True Promise 4. This was not a limited strike, but a regional configuration aimed at 6 Arab nations and Israel simultaneously, proving that even a decapitated leadership could still issue commands through established lines of succession. In the United Arab Emirates, the Ministry of Defense confirmed it had engaged and destroyed 132 ballistic missiles and 195 drones in a single day, yet the sheer volume of the swarm began to saturate even the most advanced defense systems. Debris from young interceptions fell like lethal rain over residential neighborhoods in Abu Dhabi, claiming the life of at least one foreign citizen and causing heavy damage across Khalifa City and Mohammed bin Zayed City. In Dubai, the image of stability was shattered as drone fragments struck the iconic Burj Al Arab and ignited a fire on the outer facade of the Fairmont The Palm Hotel. Tourists who had come for the winter sun found themselves rushing to parking lots and underground spaces as smoke rose from the Palm Jumeirah, a harrowing reminder that no city in the region was safe from the fallout. Meanwhile, in Bahrain, a missile strike hit the service center of the United States Navy's 5th Fleet in the Jufair district, forcing emergency evacuations as explosions echoed near the heart of American naval power in the Gulf. The terror was not confined to military targets. In Qatar, residents of Doha fled for their lives as multiple salvos shook the city, with at least one missile erupting in a fireball on a residential street. The geopolitical fallout was immediate and fueled by a profound sense of betrayal among Gulf Arab nations. While Nung states had privately lobbied for the containment of Iran, they were now bearing the physical cost of a war they had not officially joined. Saudi Arabia, whose capital Riyadh was rocked by explosions, called on the United Nations Security Council to intervene, while Kuwait defined the strikes as a blatant violation of its national sovereignty. Jordan, acting with clinical neutrality, announced it would act against any intrusion into its airspace regardless of the source, a signal that the regional corridor of fire was becoming too dangerous for any state to ignore. Amidst the smoke and fire, the humanitarian cost began to mount, raising grave legal and moral questions about the nature of preemptive warfare. Reports from the southern Iranian town of Minab suggested that an airstrike had hit a girls' primary school during classes, with early estimates indicating that dozens of children were buried under the rubble. While the United States Central Command stated NAW was investigating Nung reports and emphasized NAW would never deliberately target civilians, the incident became a rallying cry for those who viewed the operation as an illegal act of aggression. International legal experts argued that the concept of a preemptive strike, lacking a United Nations mandate, eroded the very foundations of international law, creating a dangerous double standard where one country's defense is another's unprovoked aggression. The war of wills had begun, and as the first day drew to a close, No was clear that the removal of a single leader had not brought peace, but had instead unleashed a chaotic and unpredictable regional configuration that threatened to engulf the entire Middle East in a war of attrition. The confirmation of the supreme leader's death came first from Israeli intelligence, who reported that 86-year-old Ali Khamenei had been terminated in the opening strike of Operation Roaring Lion. Israeli sources soon circulated that they possessed photographic evidence of the supreme leader's body recovered from the smoldering debris. This was the intended result of a massive, boldly executed daytime attack that caught the Iranian leadership completely off guard during a Saturday morning meeting. Within a staggering 30 seconds, the entire command structure of the Islamic Republic was effectively decapitated. Along with Khamenei, the list of the dead included 40 senior commanders and 7 members of the top security leadership, such as Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh and IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour. Even the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, Abdul Rahim Musavi, was confirmed eliminated by the Israel Defense Forces. The strikes hit the Supreme Leader compound, the Ministry of Intelligence, and the headquarters of the National Security Council in rapid succession, leaving no room for an orderly evacuation or transfer of command. In the United States, President Donald Trump monitored the mission from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, describing the operation as a tremendous success that had taken out one of the most evil people in history. His message was not just for the global stage, but was directed toward the heart of the Iranian people. He proclaimed that the hour of their freedom was at hand and encouraged them to rise up and reclaim their destiny. He explicitly called for regime change, telling the citizens that when the bombardment was finished, the government would be theirs to take a generational opportunity that might not come again. This was a decisive pivot from decades of American policy that had previously shied away from such overt calls for the overthrow of the theocratic regime. Trump noted that while past presidents were unwilling to provide this level of help, he was giving the people what they had long asked for. However, as the dust settled over the ruined presidential palace and the fractured intelligence nerve centers, the reality of a post-Khamenei Iran revealed a dangerous black hole of power. While celebrations erupted among the Iranian diaspora from Los Angeles to London to Hamburg, and some residents in Tehran cheered and chanted from their balconies, the internal situation remained precariously divided. The regime's apparatus is not based on a single individual, but is a multi-layered system designed for survival. The Revolutionary Guards, although wounded, prepared for a full takeover, with intelligence assessments suggesting that a harsher military-religious dictatorship could emerge in the vacuum. Ali Larijani, the head of the Supreme National Security Council, emerged as the most powerful surviving figure, signaling that the regime would fight with a knife in its heart to preserve its grip on power. As air raid sirens continued to blare across Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and the Iranian people faced a near-total internet and communications blackout, the world realized that while the head of the octopus was gone, its tentacles were still capable of lashing out with lethal force. The geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting as the United States carrier strike group centered on the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest warship, arrived off the northern coast of Israel. This 100,000-ton vessel, powered by 2 nuclear reactors and carrying over 80 combat aircraft, represents a massive concentration of naval power. It is joined by the USS Abraham Lincoln, stationed in the Arabian Sea, 150 miles off the coast of Oman, creating a dual-carrier pincer that puts every Iranian strategic facility within operational range. While the Armada maintains its posture, the American Embassy in Jerusalem took the drastic step of issuing an authorized departure notice for all non-emergency staff and their families. Ambassador Mike Huckabee's message was blunt. Those wishing to leave should do so today, as commercial flight availability could tighten if the security situation deteriorates. This depopulation of diplomatic posts is a classic precursor to sustained conflict, signaling that Washington is preparing for a scenario where Iran's remaining forces attempt to prolong the violence. Behind the scenes, the decision-making architecture in Washington has moved from pressure tactics to the final stages of execution. Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of United States Central Command, briefed President Trump on military options for the first time since this crisis began in early January of 2026. For 2 months, Cooper had been excluded from these high-level discussions, with the more cautious General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, serving as the primary military voice in the president's ear. Kane's reluctance, described by sources as a focus on risk and complexity, was eventually overtaken by the field commander's tactical readiness and the failure of diplomacy in Geneva, Vice President J.D. Vance reinforced this by stating there is no chance of a long, protracted war, though he did not rule out the surgical strikes that Admiral Cooper laid out for the president. The political logic is to hit known coordinates, declare the nuclear program obliterated, and avoid a ground invasion or another decades-long engagement. However, the day-after scenario remains a chaotic riddle with no easy answers. While the supreme leader is gone, intelligence assessments suggest that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps may consolidate power into a military-religious dictatorship. This new leadership is expected to be even more aggressive, with an instinct for fear through force and an absolute resistance to any further dialogue with the West. The regional proxies, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, find themselves in a state of cautious waiting. Israeli generals argue that Hezbollah's will has been broken, pointing to the fact that they have yet to fire their massive rocket arsenal in full support of Tehran. Yet, the threat remains. Hezbollah still possesses thousands of rockets within range of Israeli cities, and the Houthis have threatened to immediately renew attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Domestically, the lack of congressional authorization has sparked a constitutional firestorm. President Trump did not seek a vote before launching what critics call an unauthorized act of war. Some analysts refer to the American Congress as a broken branch of government that has been supine since the president returned to office. Despite these internal fractures, the administration is leaning into a peace through strength initiative, believing that the Iranian regime only understands raw power. As the Omani foreign minister flies to Washington in a last-ditch effort to save diplomacy, the window of opportunity is closing fast. The mission, dubbed Operation Epic Fury, is no longer just a contingency. It is an ongoing reality that aims to reshape the Middle East by eliminating the very leadership that sustained its instability for 47 years. The final curtain has fallen over the skies of Iran, revealing a stark and irreversible reality. The latest satellite imagery, analyzed by top intelligence experts at Maxar and Planet Labs, has confirmed a nightmare scenario for the Tehran regime. Iran's defense is gone. There are no more early warning radars, no more S-300 or S-400 surface-to-air missile batteries that were once considered an impenetrable iron shield. All that remains are scorched black streaks and massive craters on the digital map. The collapse of this defense network is not merely a tactical military failure, it is the end of a decades-long era of deterrence. Satellites captured the scene at the Omidyeh Air Base and the strategic port of Bandar Abbas, where the most heavily protected sites now sit empty and silent. Missile launchers are overturned, and radar command centers have been crushed under the weight of precision-guided long-range munitions. This total devastation has created an unprecedented security vacuum in the modern history of the Middle East. With Tehran's ability to defend itself eradicated at the root, the regional balance of power was upended in less than 24 hours. Geopolitical experts suggest that wiping out Iran's defense system has stripped the regime of its most vital tool for maintaining power and threatening regional rivals. Now, there is no shield left to stop further strikes, placing the survivors within the Iranian leadership in a state of extreme desperation. Infrared satellite images also recorded remnants of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps attempting to retreat into deep cave complexes within the Zagros Mountains. However, even in the most remote locations, surveillance from low Earth orbit constellations remains relentless. Every small movement, every attempt to regroup, is detected and designated for the stealth drone swarms patrolling the skies. Meanwhile, on the international stage, the reaction to the collapse of a regional military power is a mixture of awe and anxiety over an uncertain future. President Donald Trump, in his speech concluding the campaign from the Oval Office, declared that a new era of peace is beginning through absolute strength. He asserted that the total destruction of Iran's military capability was an inevitable step to protect the world from nuclear threats and transnational terrorist networks. Yet, behind these booming victory claims lies a complex and evolving humanitarian reality. International organizations warn that the takedown of the defense system has also crashed civilian communication and logistics networks, leading to chaos in major urban centers. Satellite photos show tens of thousands of people flooding toward border crossings, creating a massive wave of migration heading toward neighboring countries. As Operation Epic Fury reaches its conclusion, the world stands before an entirely new geopolitical map. Iran, a nation that was the heart of resistance to Western influence for 47 years, is now a land with a completely paralyzed defense system. The lessons of this lightning conflict will be studied and analyzed for generations at global military strategic institutes. It serves as proof that in the age of space warfare and artificial intelligence-controlled weaponry, a nation's power is no longer measured by its number of soldiers but by its mastery of technology and information. As the last clouds of smoke slowly dissipate over the Tehran skyline, a new chapter of human history has been rewritten in fire, steel, and cold satellite imagery, leaving a world holding its breath as it watches a region transform from the ashes of war.